Hello, hello, hello. Today I'm talking with John Turley. We talked about the link between trauma and addiction and about helping teams becoming better.
I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Are you a Scrum or Agile enthusiast? Would you like to grow in your role? Or would you like to connect with peers around the world? Then the Online Scrum Master Summit is just for you. My name is Esther Schmid, and I'm the main host of this global summit. You can join us from the 17th to the 19th of June, all virtually. So join us because we have great keynotes, insightful talks, and hands-on workshops. So go to osms25.com and register for free. Looking forward to see you there.
Hello, everyone, and hello with me. I have John. Welcome.
Hi, Eve. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And what I want to do before we start, typically want to. Oops, where is my mouse? Yeah, I want to show us a little bit on where we are. So I'm in Ghent in Belgium, and you're in the UK and in North Luffingham.
Yeah,
Is that
there we
how I
go. There it is. There's my house in North Luffenham. Yes,
Well, I don't know if the exact location of the house. That's not the
that's
intention, of
that is
course.
pretty darn close. Yeah, it is pretty
Wow.
darn
Okay.
close.
So, and I'm recording this in Belgium, like I said, and it's 20 minutes, 23 minutes after 7. What's the time on your side?
23 past 6.
Because we're one time zone away. So
Only
that's a
one.
little bit. I always want to show it a little bit because depending on where people are, what they're watching, they might not always know where people
Yeah,
are.
no, thanks.
And I've discovered that with people that I know for a long time that I actually didn't know where they were living. So
That is true.
it's
That's the thing. Yeah, yeah. No, I
that's
think it's
something
a good
interesting
idea.
as well. Before John, before we jump into the questions, how do you, yeah, would you introduce yourself? What do you want people to know about you?
Well, hello everyone. My name is John Turley. What do we want to know about everyone? Agile. Well, so I've been in the IT business for a little over 30 years. My background really was operations roles, technical operations roles, but I wasn't very good at them. So I got into project management quite early, and I was fascinated by it. So in England, we're talking about Prince 2 and PMI type methodologies, waterfall. We'd obviously call it these days, not so much then. And I really wanted to master it. That was my intention, because I noticed that, I mean, very early in my career, in the early 90s, I noticed that we just weren't very good at changing the way we did things, changing the way our organizations worked. And given that so many people appeared to be miserable, even to my eye, in my early career, changing our organizations to be something where we could thrive, where we could be happier, enjoy our work, given how much time we spent there, seemed really important. So I hung out in the project management space a lot, and I did everything that I really could try there, setting up PMOs and portfolio management and projects and you name it. But about 8 years ago, that career came to an end. I just couldn't do it anymore, Eve. I was broken really by the hours and the heavy lifting and the unreasonable expectations. And I thought, well, if I'm not good enough now, really, or as good, I haven't mastered it, I must be missing something. So I set out on this part of my second part of my career, where I started to try and figure out what is it that I was missing. A long time ago, 2004, I got into agile and I started to integrate agile ways of working and waterfall ways of working, right? But still, it wasn't good enough. Still, I was missing something. And by then, a long way into my career, I knew, like lots of other people, that it isn't about the processes and the tools. It's obviously about the individuals and the interactions. But what did that really mean? What does it really mean in terms of how we think and how we practice? So I really went on a voyage of discovery, and I met John Kern, who you've spoken to, and we went on this voyage of discovery together, trying to work out what it was that we were both missing from sort of the way we practiced agile software development techniques by then. So I spent 6 years working for Adaptivist. I finished working there at the end of January. And here I am. So as an introduction to me as a professional, really, the first thing I thought of, though, to be honest, is I'm father of two, Lucy and Charlie, who are 18 and 20, husband to Lindsay, and I've just come back from my aunt's 70th birthday celebration at a local hotel where we had a glass of champagne and some tea and cake as well. So there you go. There's an introduction to me.
That's I would say a nice in every aspect. I mean, there's the like you say, the work part. There is the family and even the extended family. I like that it's because that's for me. We are not just compartmentalized, or how do you say that? In different kind of parts, we are, when most people, when they introduce themselves, indeed, we want to look at multiple aspects of ourselves. So
this is very important to me too. We're human beings first, right? Not project managers or software developers or product managers or whatever, and we maybe somewhere along the way, the world has forgotten that a little bit and dehumanized our world of work. Yes. So we'll reintroduce, or we'll start with the human aspects, I guess.
Yeah. And well, even though we spend most of our time or a lot of our awake time in the office or working one way or another, we still are the same human being, I would say. And we still might think during the day about our children, our spouse, or anyone else.
Certainly true.
Let's move to that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Well, you were kind enough to let me know about the questions beforehand, right? And like a good boy, I had a little think about them. And of course, there's lots of things one could say at this point. But the things that I would like to share with you, I maybe need a little bit of a trigger warning for some people. Again, that sort of real humanity of our existence. So the first thing that I wanted to mention, and there were two, if I may, is that some people know, because I don't keep it a secret, but I don't sort of advertise too much, my history with addiction. All sorts of addictions, really, but primarily alcohol. And that's obviously colored my life to a significant degree. It's perfectly okay now, and has been for a while, for a long time, really. But there's that has always been a difficult thing for me, and I suppose still is in some ways. That was one thing.
And if I can may, when did this start? If you want to share, is it something you had from an early age, or how does that?
Well, thank you, Eve. Thank you. So, I started drinking when I was very young. I mean, at 13 years old, I was banned from my first pub for being full down drunk, right? And by 18 or 20, I was in trouble, but didn't know it. By 28, I was still kind of doing the same thing, just drinking heavily, but still functioning, still holding down a job, hadn't blown all my relationships, that kind of thing, still functioning. And I always describe myself as having had a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol, or having a drink problem, but never an alcoholic, never an addict. Okay. I was desperate for a way out when I was 28, and I met my wife, and I've always said, and Lindsay's always told me that I'm wrong, that my wife saved me. I needed another way to live my life, but I didn't know how to get there, Eve. I was desperate, but I didn't know how to stop behaving the way I was behaving. But I did when we got married, and I spent the next 20 years on falling off the rails, but not even in a really big way that anybody would particularly think was problematic. So by 48, I'm still, or maybe 45, I'm still saying I used to have a drink problem, right? But there was something wrong. As I got into my late 40s, I started to feel that there was something there's something that still wasn't right. And in these explorations that I mentioned in the introduction, because I value people and individuals and interactions, human and so on, I got into trauma therapy and how trauma impacts the way we show up and work and that kind of thing. And I was reading a book by a therapist called Jan Winhall about addiction. And she said in the book, she had this case study of a guy called Joe, right? Not his real name. And as I read Joe's case study through this, I went, well, if this guy is an addict, I was doing all those things, then I'm an addict. And I realized then, this was a massive breakthrough for me, really, because I realized then that in between 28, when I kind of really curbed my drinking, and let's say 48, because the numbers make it nice and round, what I was doing was not drinking through willpower. And that wasn't the same as not wanting to drink, you know? So I dug a little bit deeper. And one of the things that I learned from Jan, and she's not the only one who says this, was a non-pathologizing view of addiction. So not addiction as a function of some sort of internal weakness or moral failing or a disease or something that you're hooked on, but substance abuse as a reasonable mechanism to cope with the pain of the trauma that you'd experienced or that I'd experienced early on in my life, right? And this at last, I mean, I'd been to AA and I couldn't get on with AA. AA is wonderful. It saved my dad's life, right? But I couldn't get on with it. And lots of people I know couldn't get on with AA because, well, for all sorts of reasons. But this non-pathologizing view, oh, that's me. I'm not broken. I'm drinking for sensible reasons. What are those reasons? And I started to be able to get at those. And then the desire to not drink disappeared. So I had this long period of not drinking, but I wanted to. And I realized in the end, that was no way to live, really. So then I did that work with the help of Jan and some other people. And, you know, now I don't want to drink and I don't drink rather than wanting to drink and not drinking, you know. So that's kind of what happened there.
Wow, that's like you say, it might be trigger people, but it's very brave to share it because well, there's two important parts there, indeed. Like, okay, stopping is one thing, but then realizing that there is a deeper layer that why you started that. That's well really powerful. Because indeed, what I hear of people who had some kind of addiction is that the addiction never goes away, and that it's indeed willpower and things like that happen. And at the same time, I know that in many cases that might be because of some trauma, but I never linked the two to it. As long as you haven't dealt with the trauma, that there is still some, I don't know, kind of emptiness that needs to be filled with the addiction or something.
Well,
I don't know.
there's a healing. Trauma is the words derived from the Greek for wound. There's a gentleman called Gable Mathe, who you might have heard of. Some of the people watching might have heard of. He's a Hungarian-Canadian physician. And he says, to pinch his words, that trauma isn't what happens to you. It's what happens in your body as a result of what happens to you. And this for me is very, very profound. And I'm not asking anybody to agree with me or Gabor, or I'm just sharing what I think. And I'm taking the risk maybe of triggering people a little bit. But there's a risk of not mentioning this. You were right. I've got a screensaver.
Okay.
There's a risk of not triggering, of not mentioning it, right? And that people sit in silence on their own. They become isolated and disconnected. And that's not an answer, you know. So Gabor says that whilst we trauma isn't what happens to us, it's what happens in our body as a result of what happens to us. And the reason this is profound is because we cannot change what happened to us. That's past, it's gone, right? What we can do is change our relationship with what happened to us, and we can change what happens in our bodies now as a result of what happened to us.
Mm.
So anyway, there's a little bit more, and as I say, I'm not asking anybody to agree with me, really. It's just one perspective, but
Well,
on
it's
the help.
how it helped you and how you are where you are now with thanks to what you've
Yeah.
learned from these things.
So do you think we've spent enough time on that one? You need to ask me another question, or shall I tell you the other thing I was going to mention?
I was thinking already to let's move to this to that next thing that you wanted to talk, because when I interrupted you, but still I think it might be important to share. Uh,
Yeah. So the addiction one's easy, relatively.
mm,
The other thing that
oh,
shaped me is the loss of our son.
oh,
Yeah, that's a big one. I'm sure you can, and viewers a sense the emotion in me saying that. Yeah, we lost our son when he was 9 days old, um, and that was very very difficult. And it's unfortunately it's another thing that happens a lot more than we might think, and it gets dealt with behind closed doors, or maybe not dealt with at all, but certainly doesn't get talked about. So that taught me. I think I value my children in a way that is different. If that hadn't happened, of course, I would love all three of my children if they were all here. But the two that are still with us sort of value that more. And you realize how, experiencing how fragile life is, I guess, and the trauma of the loss of a child, that's shaped me a great deal. And again, the reason I mention it, and I'm kind of worrying that a little bit that people have found that difficult to hear. Maybe when we do our work, when we are developing software, there will be people who have had experiences like these. I won't repeat them again, and we just carry on and ignore that. And I'm not saying we need to talk about it every time. I'm not saying everybody needs to talk about everything always. What I am saying is that we, each of us, need to remain cognizant that other people are going through some stuff. And I know this is a meme that does the rounds, it pops up on LinkedIn and so on every now and then, but it's true. And when we stop and think about why we are ineffective at developing software products in our work, why our teams maybe not working so well, I heard somebody today say, well, it's my boss. That's basically what they said. It's my boss. And that might be true, but it fails to look at us, ourselves, and how much attention are we paying to other people as human beings in the workplace, so I share that as well, for similar reasons.
yeah. And I think what you said right after that, like the fact that we don't talk enough about it. My wife and I, we had a miscarriage. So we had two children, then we had a miscarriage. And what I've discovered after that period, because just like you, I rather talked much open about it, is that what I discovered in these days is that actually there were a lot of people around me that had a similar experience but never talked about it.
Mm,
And some that I thought that I wouldn't say I know everything about it, but I was really surprised with some people that I didn't know it.
mm,
And that is such a shame, because indeed there is a lot of all kind of emotions. Some people are just sad, other are angry, or whatever kind of emotion that it brings, but that's emotions that are kept inside and that are not shared.
mm,
And yeah, sharing these kind of conversations helped me at least to talk
mm,
about it, and to learn both from myself and from my friends or
mm.
colleagues with who I worked with.
Well, thank you for
Um,
sharing that, Eve. And I have a question for you. Um, when you were sort of in those dark days of experiencing that with your wife and your other children, did you did you find it helpful when you learned that other people had been through similar things, even if you didn't talk with it very much about them?
yeah, for me it was very helpful. I think it
Yeah.
was that's why I that's why when you when we had the pre-talk, you said, okay, there might be difficult things I want to share. That I said, okay, let's bring that, because I think it's important to bring these kind of things. I
Yeah.
think we learn so much, and sometimes they're painful. And to finish the story, so now we have a third or a fourth child. I prefer in most cases to talk about four children because we've lost one.
Yeah. Get that.
But my now 17-year-old daughter, when she was, I don't know how old she was, like, I think 3 or 5 maybe or something. At some point, she said like, "Oh, but I'm happy that child died, because if that child hadn't died, then I wouldn't be here." And that was both good and bad at the same time, because it was true. We knew that we wanted to have 3 children, and so having her say that was at the same time, it was hurtful, and at the same time it's like, yeah, it's true. We are now in another situation, and that was healing in a way, even though it did hurt. And she, I don't know how long, but there was a rather long period, or at least it felt to me that she was saying that multiple times. 17, so she's not talking about that anymore. But yeah, for me as a father, it was an important thing to hear, um, because even for her, it is important that she knows that history, and that it doesn't bring trauma with her. Because that's sometimes what I see, is that when parents go to such an emotional thing, that they might have trauma that has not been dealt with in a healthy way, that it's transferred to children, or things like that. And yeah, I think in that way we yeah, I feel much, yeah, I hope that we didn't transfer it, and it doesn't feel like that for me, at least. Um,
Well, I sure did.
mhm,
My drinking, if we say my drinking was a result of my trauma, not just the drinking though, even when I wasn't drinking, I've always been, since I was very young, an angry man. People have said that to me a lot. People walk around me on eggshells and this kind of stuff. And that anger is also my trauma. That's what I think. And my children had to grow up with an angry father walking around on eggshells, and that to some degree was not obviously great. We could call it trauma. Definitely wasn't great for them. Definitely made a difference. And so there's an example of my life in this sort of stuff rolling downhill. And that's really why I had to do my work. It's one of the reasons why I had to do my work. So I stopped dumping it on my kids. You know.
mhm. And is this something that you, again, you decide how far you want to share, but that you did talk with your children as part of healing for yourself, that to talk with them, or was that, I don't know, how was that for you?
Yeah, for sure. I'm very open with the kids. I mean, Charlie, we always had pictures around of the 3 kids. They were very young. I mean, there's 19 months between our 2 children, so there would have been between the twins and Lucy. We always had photos around, and we talked very openly about it. I've talked with them about my anger and my addictions and so on. So yes, I've been very open about that. My daughter is also autistic. She has an ADHD diagnosis, or getting. And, those words are funny, and we could talk about those a lot too. The point is, though, is that I had to learn a lot about myself in learning how to parent an autistic child. And you wouldn't know she was autistic if you met her, probably, right? And there are lots of different flavors of autism and so on. It's tricky territory. Yeah, but to understand how to be a better parent to her when she was finding life difficult was also part of the reason why I went on my journey. Yeah. Yes, it's all been very open, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, well, and I think especially when you say that there was a part that wasn't dealt with, I think it's often sharing that the difficulty, and yeah, the different, and I guess the different person you are now as years ago, when you hadn't learned about how to deal with that trauma and
Mm.
everything. So that's yeah. So thank you for sharing this with me and with everybody who's listening here. Let's move to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what could have become of you, or would have become of you?
Yeah, so I've always told myself a story. And I think it's very useful to differentiate between the things that we can say objectively happen in the world and the stories that we tell ourselves about what happens in the world. So this part of the story that I've always told myself is that if I'd have been to a school that had more opportunity to play sport, because I was quite sporty and I was sort of half decent at various things, that maybe a career in sport beckoned or something like that, because I love sport. I think in truth, I wasn't good enough to ever make a living at it. So that was just a story I told myself. Another story I told myself, right, is if I wasn't, doing IT, I sort of fell into by mistake, I'd have loved to have been a musician. I love music, but I don't really have a talent for anything, any playing any instrument. So I think that's just a story that I told myself. I think what I would have been doing though, still, is in those worlds, either in the sports world or maybe in the world of arts, is drawing together people from different fields to do interesting things together. I think there's, we've been aware for a long time, and I think it's just evidently true that real innovation and real creativity explode, they emerge when you bring different things together, different perspectives from the world, and they somehow manage to gel. I love doing that in my work, and I think I would have loved doing that in the field of the arts even more. So that's my guess. I'm an aspiring sportsman and musician and artist with no talent for either of those. So I'd have probably just hung out with lots of people who were good at it and introduced them to each other and see what they come up with. That's what I think.
Well, but it could be that I guess in some musical groups there might be people who have more talent than others, and maybe someone is really the person that makes the glue, even though they might originally not have many talent, but that
The social glue, yes, the glue. The social glue is so important, isn't it? Yeah, that sort of maybe consensus building. Yes, that's what I love doing. Bringing people together and not just introducing them. It's not just enough to introduce interesting people. You need to somehow facilitate the flow of information between people. And then when, then people start to get engaged and they start to do things of their own volition, towards a commonly understood goal. That would be my definition of autonomy right there. And I think there's great magic and joy in that, to be honest, I do.
And do you have any tips or tricks on doing that? Is there anything that you say, okay, for bringing people together and having them that focus?
Well, that is a good question, because I had my tip and my trick, my agile tip ready. Okay, yes, there is. Okay. If we want to take individuals and interactions over processes and tools seriously, which we clearly haven't done since the manifesto was published, and it was, that's not the only time it's been pointed out as a good idea. We've said individuals and interactions over processes and tools, and then spent most of our time on processes and tools. Because what do we do with individuals and interactions? Well, that's really what we're talking about here. When we bring people together from different fields in the hope that they'll collaborate, but somehow facilitate a flow of information in that, playing that role of social glue, that's what we're talking about, right? Individuals and interactions. And the key thing, the tip, my tip, is presence. We have to be here as human beings, right? This is an idea that really came from a very famous psychotherapist called Carl Rogers, to begin with, or at least early on in the 60s, unconditional positive regard. But to be, and a guy called Eugene Gendlin, who did his PhD with Rogers in the 60s, they talked a lot about presence, and you hear this word a lot without us really understanding what it means. But when we sit here as two human beings, kind of being a little bit vulnerable, as we were earlier, sharing some difficult periods of our life, even though we've only just met, there's something in us innately human that emerges, and we connect. We connect in a way that isn't merely transactional. It's important and it's human. And once we have presence together, attention can start to flourish. And what we pay attention to, we become intentional about and we tend to act upon. But it all starts with presence. Listening starts with presence. I often say that if we want to change the way organizations work, if we want to change things, we need to change the way that we need to change the patterns of conversation and the way they unfold across the organization. And that doesn't start with somebody saying something different. For a long time, I thought that it did. What it starts with is somebody turning up who listens differently. If you turn up with presence, an attentive presence, and you're listening to understand rather than listening to respond, people will feel that in you. There's a process in the autonomic nervous system called co-regulation, right? Which we could do later if you like. People will feel it. That's not me being woolly or fluffy. They'll sense it and they will speak into that space that you've created with your presence and your attention. And when people say something that hasn't been said before, that's when things start to, the change starts to move forwards, you know? So that's I think, so that's a tip. That's what you asked for, but something that's at the essence of individuals and interactions, you know, present attention.
That indeed can yeah, if you have if you do that to one person and you might do that to another person, actually in a way you're creating already a bond with these two other people, but in a way also creating a small little group or multiple people, and
that's correct. It'll spread without you having to do anything. If your nervous system is in the right place so you can be present, then that presence and that safety that's in your body will spread throughout the group.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if that's not doing anything. It's actually doing a lot, and for some people it's not always easy to be so present. And especially I would, well, let's turn it into a question. Do you think these days it is harder to be present with all the social media and all the these distractions that we have, or do you think it could be as hard as it was when you were younger?
Do you know what I'm tempted to say? I mean, I don't know. I mean, the standard discourse at the moment is, of course, to say, yes, it is, right? And I think in some sense it is. The world is getting more complex. That's measurable, actually, measured by people. The world is getting more complex. It is more volatile and unpredictable. And that does make a difference to people. So, yes, I think it is harder. That's, in a way, it's harder. In a way, though, I think it's not harder. You know, presence is something, it's really an idea that you find in all the great religions. It's what happened to a Hindu prince when he wandered out of his, not castle, palace, and, you know, reached enlightenment and became Buddha, right? That's all a search for presence. You know, it's not that dissimilar anyway. So there's always, throughout humankind, I think there has been this this need, this yearning to be present with whatever there is to be present with. And it's always been difficult. So in a sense, yes, I think it's harder because the world's faster. In a sense, though, I think it must have always been very, very difficult. So no, I don't think it is any harder. So take your pick, yes or no? I don't know, or both.
It's a typical agile coaching answer. It depends.
It depends.
It's both yes and no. And we have it in all kind of things, not just when people ask us about agile. But yeah, I was also wondering, I mean, I can imagine that if you look back with what you shared earlier for your life, that drinking could be part of avoiding to be present in a way. Is that the right statement? Was that part of what it was for you? Try to avoid to be present?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a core of me, and not a very small core for much of my life, where frankly I detest myself, just full of self-loathing. And you can hide that and you can bury it because you don't want to face that. It's not nice to face your own self-loathing of yourself. You know, that's hard. That's really, really, really hard. And getting pissed is a really good way to not be present enough to have to face it, or keeping busy, or having lots of sex, or shopping, or buying sports cars. I mean, you pretty much get addicted to anything, I think, you know. But these kind of behaviors that cover up, that stop us having to face the reality of what's really going on, that distract us from it. Yeah, which is the opposite of present. Yes, that's exactly what my drinking was about, you know.
And in a way, well, all of the things that list that you just gave, that short list, these are most of these are good things, but it's only when they become an addiction or when they're part of an addiction that they become a bad thing, I think.
That lady that I mentioned before, Jan Winhall, gives a definition of addiction, which is that it helps. You're addicted if you're doing something that helps you in the short term, hurts you in the long term, and you can't stop. And when I heard that from Jan in the book, I think that I read, that was the first way I got to know Jan's work. I was like, oh, well, if that's a definition of addiction, then I was an addict. I can remember, I couldn't stop drinking, you know. And it did help me in the short term, and it did hurt me in the long term. Yeah. So yeah, you can do that with anything, right? As my grandparents, I don't know what it's like in Belgium, but maybe different. But my grandparents used to say to me a lot, all things in moderation. And of course, they died when I was quite young, and they would say stuff, and I thought they were boring, and I loved them very much. I sort of boring grandparents, you know, like when you, I was like, what are you talking about? You don't understand all of that. And then you get to 53 now I am and go, oh yeah, I get it.
They were right after all.
Good point, Grandma. Wish I'd listened a bit more seriously.
Yeah, and probably at the moment that you learn something like that, you think like, I wish somebody told me earlier. And actually, there probably were tons of people who told you earlier and you never listened.
My grandparents told me earlier. I've been told a lot of things by a lot of people, and I didn't listen, which sort of links us back to that point of if you want to change the way an organization is functioning or a team is functioning, it's not what's said that's not the start of the change. There's got to be somebody to listen. If you're not in a place to listen, as I wasn't to many people, including my grandparents, then you're not really present, are you? Or at least you could say you weren't really present, you know? So yeah. Well, I wasn't ready to hear lots of things that I needed to hear for much of my life, I suppose.
Yeah, but I think this is also part of being younger, because we're so foolish and we think we want to change the world, and we have so much better ideas.
Yeah.
And in some ways we do make changes, but sometimes we need to listen to the older one to avoid other kind of things.
Yeah.
Really wonderful stories. Let's move to that third question. What is your biggest challenge right now, and at least the biggest challenge you want to share openly on the internet? And why is it a good thing for you?
Well, it isn't.
I'm not sure.
It isn't not having a drink. I'm perfectly all right with that one. And as I mentioned, I had a glass of champagne just before I joined you. So I think this is a wonderful question in a way. And what I thought mostly about this is how I have struggled over the years to answer questions like these, you know. But this question is, what's one of the things you struggle with, and how does it help you, right? Which I think is an intriguing way to put it. And I guess all the things that I'm good at have a sort of corollary. They have a flip side. They all point to something I'm not good at. Okay, so crikey, I'm going to go back to Jan Winhall again. In the end, I mean, I just adore Jan, and I think her work is genius and it's brilliant. And so I read her book. I do a training course with her, and I'm so enamored with this brilliant lady who happens to live in Toronto, which is where my wife is from. She says at the end of a training course, you know, if anybody's in Toronto, look me up. And I'm like, wow, I'm going to be in Toronto. So she and I get together for brunch, right, basically around the corner from where she lives. And we had a wonderful time, wonderful conversation. And as we're walking away, we've been talking for about 2 hours. She looks at me and she says, have you ever thought you might have ADHD? And I went like this, no. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, was that too much? I said, no, it's fine. I'd never thought it. And now you mention it, Now, whatever you think about the Diagnostical and Statistics Manual and things like ADHD and forget about all of that for a moment. What I have got is, well, it seems highly likely, I can say this for sure, that I have ADHD, right? So one of the things I struggle with is attention, right? I struggle to pay attention to things. I struggle to hold on to bits of information. But what I realized is that whilst I'm struggling to hold on to bits of information, I have this equal and opposite thing going on. For me, these are the words of another psychotherapist, clinical psychologist, the hyperactivity part, isn't for me something that happens in my body. I've never been a particularly hyperactive child, and nobody said that to me when I was a kid. I wasn't running around like stereotypically we do. But this clinical psychologist said, yeah, the hyperactivity can be mental as well. And as much as I struggle to put my attention on some things because there's this deficit, and there are things that other people notice in the world that just pass me by, drives my family wild. There are other things that I can pay so much attention to, it's like a superpower, so that I'm aware of other things that people aren't. So I struggle with my ADHD, and I have done since I was a kid, though we didn't call it that then. But it's also a strength. That sounds a little bit cliche now I come to think of it. A lot of people say that, but it is also a strength. The hyperactivity part is a laser-like focus on some things. So I'm in this strange position where I'm ignoring all sorts of things that are going on around me. I'm not even aware of them. But the thing that I've got my attention on, oh boy, that has got my attention. So there we are. There's a struggle I have and a benefit that it brings me.
I really like that, because we live in a world that, and indeed you talked briefly about the whole, I don't know, certification, or the fact and how we diagnostic people. But there's a lot about that is focusing on the negative of autistic, of HDAD, of whatever. And actually, there is always a positive side to it. Well, always is maybe exaggerated. It's never. I don't like to use always or never as words, but there is, in many cases, there is a balance part.
Yeah,
And
often.
if we can focus that, if we, with children, we can either complain about them. Oh, you're always having, I don't know, you ask too much energy or whatever, or we can try to find to I don't know, to channel that energy into some kind of sports, and then maybe they become a very good sportsman, and they do something very similar like you do. They focus all that attention to, I don't know, a certain sport that when they're very young, where they can use all that energy in, and they have that focus, that razor like focus that you talked about.
I think that is often true, and it's lost somewhat. So this is my experience of being a father of a daughter who's autistic, ADHD and OCD as well. Is that we focus on, well, when we call it a disorder, we focus on the problems that it brings, but there is almost always, not always, almost always a corollary, a strength that comes with it, so and yet we don't focus on that as much, maybe reasonably, maybe because we have to support the struggles. That's more important if people are struggling to get by. But there's almost always a corollary, as there is with so many things. Light and dark. Light makes no sense without darkness. Fast makes no sense without slow, and so on and so on and so on. Almost everything we find implies its opposite, which is almost always there, often unrecognized, in the same way as with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. No light without dark. That's just true.
Yeah, and it's something that we, indeed, like you say, when people are in school, there's a lot of focus on, okay, we have to, I don't know, one of my children has dyslexia, and so there's a lot of focus on, I don't, not even curing, but okay, making sure that they can do whatever. But there is very limited focus on Okay, but what does that mean? What does it actually bring, that creativity? There's also other kind, there's so many famous people who had dyslexia, and almost never people talk about it in school. And like, okay, there is that negative part where they focus so much in school, but there's so much on the other side that brings, and it, yeah, that we.
Yeah, that's why your question's such a good one. What's something you struggle with, and how does it help you? That it really gets you thinking a little bit differently about that. You know, it's a good question.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I keep mentioning it. I've invented these questions like 10 years ago in less than 5 minutes, and I'm still amazed by myself at how good they were. I had no idea what. Well, I don't drink alcohol either, so it can be inspired by that. I don't know what inspired it anyway. Let's move to that next question, because for me it comes very across. You're very passionate. You talked about you wanted to learn Prince 2 and all, changing all these things and to become really better, so that there's a lot of passion, a lot of drive. Do you know where that comes from?
No, no, I don't. It's a good question. I think there is something innate, you know. I think there is something innate in human beings. We're not born, as is often said, and once very commonly thought, as a blank slate, you know, tabula rasa. We are born with a capacity to learn. That is, to take information in, to process it in some way and do something with it, right? That otherwise we wouldn't learn to walk and we wouldn't learn to talk. And of course, not everybody does, but most of us do, you know. So I think there is something in me. For as long as I can remember, I have been drawn to people and relationships. It's always been something that has really caught my attention from school. I knew very early on in my work that what the processes that we were using to plan were relatively unimportant. How we came together in the planning process, how we interacted, how we spoke to each other, what we spoke about, that's what makes a difference. You've got to have some governance when you're doing IT projects, but the governance isn't the thing that determines success or failure ever, in my experience. What determines success or failure is what the group of people talk about, when and how, right? So it's about the interaction. So there was something that's always drawn me to that. And then as life, I guess I think I probably there's something in me about that, something innate. And of course, if at a very young age you're paying a bit more attention to that than most for some reason, because it's innate, just something, a sensitivity in my nervous system is what I mean by innate, then you could just be focusing on it a little bit more when you're very, very young. And by the time you're 10, that's going to have made a difference. And 20 and 30 and 40 and 50, you know, you're going to spend your whole life paying a little bit more attention to these things. It must be a cumulative effect, you know. So I think it's something innate. But then undoubtedly there are things in my environment that make a difference. So my dad left when I was very young. I think that my mum wasn't around much in many ways either. Physically, certainly. She wasn't around much. She was around a bit physically, not very much emotionally, which is something I've talked to her a lot. So should she watch this, she won't be surprised. So I think there was always something that was grasping in me, that was grasping a little bit to get the attention I needed as a youngster. So there's something a little bit dysfunctional about it also. Yeah, now what drives me, as you've rightly identified, is I just do not believe that the world of work, which makes up a very large part of society, needs to be what it is. You know, you'll be familiar with the Gallup studies on employee engagement and how many people are disengaged, and or the big bit in the middle, I forget what it's called right now. You know, the world of work doesn't need to be like that. And we spend so much time here, and then we go home and we do the important parts of our life. So we get out of our work and we do the important stuff. We could say that. It's not. We're fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and all of that kind of thing. You know, we contribute to our society. And if we've been struggling at work because the environment doesn't support our thriving, that has an impact on the rest of society, you know. So I've a long time been passionate about playing, you know, as much of a role as I can, which is very small in shifting that. That's what drives me. And I think we're on the cusp of something, Eve. I think we are on the cusp of a very important shift at the moment in the way we perceive, or at least the way quite large but still minority pockets of people view work. You know, I think we're on the cusp of something important, a breakthrough. So yeah, that's now what drives me, as you rightly point out.
Yeah, I like that. Well, at least it's a very positive way of looking at it. Well, positive and negative at the same time, because we're not there yet. And so there is still, things that need to shift. But I recognize a lot that indeed when we pay attention, we do gradually, in small ways, make things better for people, that people feel seen. And that I have the feeling that improves things.
Oh, definitely. It's a deep human need to feel seen and heard and valued by our colleagues at work. You know, this is why the constant evaluation of objective cycles and so on is traumatic for people, right? I'm not saying they're bad things necessarily, but there is a trauma in being continuously evaluated against some criteria that you didn't set, which happens in the workplace a lot, right? Because you're not seen and valued as a human being. I'll bet you, Eve, I wonder if somebody will contact you and mention it, that conversation, there may well be somebody who watches this or is watching this who thinks, wow, these two are talking about something that I thought it's about agile. They're talking about something that I'm struggling with too, and I hadn't heard anybody else mention it. And there's a moment of humanity and connection in that will make a difference, just like it did to you and me when people put hands on their shoulders and said, yeah, we had a miscarriage too. You know?
That's indeed part of the of why I want to do this series, because it when we think about people agile, okay, we learn about all kind of tools and methods, and we learn about, oh, it's mindset and whatever, but it's really also about the people. This is really, for me, it's the people and the interactions. And before we go to the interactions, I want to learn about who's the person behind. And that's the kind of intention for me, and then hopefully that triggered other people in thinking in a similar kind of way.
Well, I think you say it very well, right? What does it say about the interaction if one of the people or any of the people involved in it don't feel valued and seen and heard? What does it say about the quality of that interaction? It says it's poor, it's transactional. And that's okay. We can have poor quality interactions, transactional interactions. Sometimes they're entirely appropriate, but sometimes they're not. You know, I bet lots of people in the world of work have got a story about somebody they worked for who really made a difference for them. And that'll be all about the fact that whoever the other person was saw them as a human being, cared about them. You know?
And especially because we spend so much time at work. I mean, there might be moments that, I don't know, I just want to go to a butcher, and maybe I don't want to go in interaction because it's, like you say, it's a transactional thing, and I might not have much time and whatever, for whatever reason. But when I'm at work, working, either if it's a client or if it's the company I like to be in, if I work day to day with other people, if that would be purely transactional and me not caring about them and they not caring about me, this is not the kind of companies I like to work in.
No, it's bereft of any joy and meaning. You know, equally, I suppose. So what I want to add to that I suppose, is the tendency of companies to say, we're a family. We're not a family,
That it usually they say that because there is that lack of it, and that's what you
Yes.
feel in many companies.
Yeah. They're normally sticking up for something, isn't there? Or, bring your whole selves to work. That only lasts as long until you do, and then they find out that actually, no, we'd rather not talk about that, or actually that opinion's not welcome, and these kind of things. So it's there's a balance, I guess, is what I'm introducing there to the interaction. Sometimes transactional is okay. Sometimes we want more humanity, but that doesn't mean everything. I mean, we have to be talking about everything always, I guess.
Yeah, I think when you say you can bring your whole self. Well, in the companies where I can bring my whole self, we don't talk about it. We just do it, and that's much more the thing I would say. Let's move to that next question. What do you consider your biggest achievement? And what I've noticed in this podcast, in this series, is that when I ask these people, basically this is your moment to brag and to be really proud. So I want to check before I go into that question, how easy is that for you, John, to brag and to be really proud?
Yeah, I'd say pretty easy. I mean, certainly it has been historically. Yeah, I'm not shy of the things that I've done that I'm proud of. The word that I struggle with in that question, though, is achievement. What is that? What does that word mean? My proudest pride I'm all right with. My proudest achievement. I don't know that I really think in terms of achievements anymore. I think in terms of doing what I'm doing, present in the moment, in interaction with other people. And whatever is achieved will be achieved from that interaction. It'll just sort of pop out it's the quality of the interaction that I'm interested in, which I don't think is really a thing that you achieve in a sense. It's a thing that happens like a river flows, maybe. The proudest achievement of the river isn't that it flowed as a river. That's just what it did, right? That said, that's a rubbish answer. So I'll give you another one.
Well, I wouldn't call it completely rubbish, because I think there's a lot of value in it, and maybe the achievement is then maybe more the fact that you pay attention, that you are there, in a way, and then the other results is more like, I don't know, is a side effect of that.
Yeah. That's correct. The achievement, as it were, is a side effect, right?
Right.
Now, what isn't a side effect, but it isn't, what am I proud of? That it isn't really an achievement, but we could call it that, right? I know. That's a big word. It's big for me to say I know something, because the world's a very unknowable place, and I think I'm learning that. I know that quite well. I know the difference that I can make to people. I do make to people in the way I interact with them, and it really comes in two forms. A lot of the work that I've done over the last few years is done one-on-one with people who are struggling in the workplace for some reason. I don't really like to talk about coaching. I'm not really a coach. I don't really do coaching, but I sometimes say that. But what I do want to do is be with people in the way I talked about before, hearing them, valuing them, being there, being present with them without an agenda. And when you do that, things start to happen. Things start to change. They can start to change for the other person. And I know because I ask people. One of the people I've been working with recently they would say to you that they were experiencing their work as being an existential terror. That's the word they used.
Wow.
An existential terror. And they would say, I know it's not as important as I think it is, the problems that we're facing in the team that he was running. But it is an existential threat, might have been the word, but existential, I'm giving it this existential importance, and I don't know why. So they were overwhelmed a lot. So their nervous system was in a highly stressed state a lot. Their bodies felt unsafe a lot. Imagine going to work in that state a lot. Now, what we managed to do quite quickly is give them some tips and tricks, really, by being with them and being present, so that they could learn how to be present with themselves. And that existential crisis, that existential element retreated. They weren't overwhelmed. They weren't as stressed. And so, and this is hugely meaningful for me, you know, and we can do similar things with groups. There are moments when I'm working with groups with co-facilitators like John Kern, when the group will start to interact in a way that they hadn't interacted before because they feel safer because we're present with them. That's one reason. And there'll be these light bulb moments where they go, I've been looking at it all wrong. Right, we'll go on. And so it's not like this, is it? It's like that. And you go, now you're getting it. These moments of realization that the world isn't what they thought it was. It's something more nuanced and more complex. And the joy in those moments for everybody involved is palpable, right? Lisa Adkins might have said something to you. I had the pleasure of being on a training course a year ago or something like that with Lisa and Michael Hammond, who I've mentioned to you. And it was very clear that she loved that moment as well, that she knows all about being present with people in a non-judgmental kind of way. And when the light bulb comes on and they see the world differently in a way that's more congruent with reality, that's quite a moment. So I'm very proud that I know, with help from a lot of people like Michael Hammond and Lisa Atkins and John, how to create a context in which those moments are more likely to occur in groups of people. Is that an achievement? I don't know. I don't think it is an achievement, but it is something. Whatever it is something, and I am very proud of it.
Well, I think indeed the word might be it's not the first time that the word achievement triggers people, and but the fact that you're proud of it is, for me, the kind of kind of thing I was looking for. What are you proud of, basically?
Yeah, we can build, Eve. We can build context, create the conditions in which context emerges where people thrive at work. Right? You don't have to stop the organization and redesign it from the outside. You turn up and interact with people differently, listen, things will start to change. And a different way of working can emerge out of the existing way of working, a way of working in which people thrive. And that is such a joy. That is such a joy. What I do now is my life's work. I will never, ever, ever stop doing this. Right? It's my calling. It's my vocation. It's thrilling. It makes a difference. I can get paid for it. And I'm pretty, as you can see, I'm pretty proud that I end up in this place. You know, it looked a lot different for a long time. My mum used to say to me, because I used to also get in quite a lot of trouble, you know, one way or the other for much of my life. She said, I'm amazed you're not in prison, John. So that is an achievement. I'm proud of that achievement.
It's a negative achievement, but it's a positive.
Oh no, I stayed out of prison. That couldn't
staying out, exactly. It's staying out. It sounds in a negative way, but it's actually very positive. And I'm trying to think of, you're not the first one. Somebody else told me also as a achievement, like, I'm happy that I've never was able to, that I didn't go to prison, because at a certain age there was a risk at that point.
And
I think there was and I think all of us, we might have done stupid and foolish things when we were young. Sometimes not as for going to jail, but still some others might be doing other things that
I think we've all probably got things that we are not proud of, ashamed of. And shame will eat us. Shame's a difficult thing to deal with. So yeah, we have, for sure. Who didn't make mistakes? Who amongst us can say that, you know?
Yeah, I think that's another part that I think is important to talk about, and indeed to be, yeah, um, to be open about some of the struggles and some of the less proud things that we have in our life.
Mm.
I want to move to that next question, and you already gave your personal agility tip when I asked earlier on. Is there something else you want to still share, or?
There is. Yeah, there is. In my work with Kern, John Kern, we've sort of been boiling, trying to get to, like so many people, we're not alone in this. I'm not even sure we're, you know, especially good at it. There are certainly many people who are better. Trying to get to the essence of something about how we act in interaction with other people. And one of the little, I think it's an important little nugget. I'll share it. People can dismiss it if they like, you know, is one of us, probably John, just said once by accident, don't do too much work too soon. And this is something we see happening all the time. Too much work happening too soon. And there are lots of very legitimate reasons why it makes sense to do loads of work too soon, too much work too soon. There's loads of reasons why it makes sense to write very, very long, complex requirement documents. Keeps you busy, keeps you in meetings, allows you to say that you've done it in your performance appraisal, avoids having to do any other really risky work, you know. But almost always doing too much work too soon is a sign that something else is going wrong later. So I think for teams maybe starting their agile journey, keeping an eye on that. Where are we doing too much work too soon? Where could we get away with doing less? Because as soon as you've got to start the places, you've got to spot the places where you're doing too much work too soon. Because only then can you do less work, which is about getting to value quicker, which improves flow, right? But it starts with just spot those places where you're doing too much work too soon. And it sounds very simple and it's very difficult. So that's
I
a
think
little
it's,
nugget there.
yeah, I think it's definitely something I recognize, and this is not about being lazy or anything, because that's what I once heard people say as well. It's really about, okay, caring about the value and achieving more value, and we don't do that by doing work that doesn't bring value, or like you say, too soon. That might mean that we have to do a lot of rework afterwards,
Yeah. And anybody in the agile world who knows how it works will know all of that we want little units of value and single piece flow and whatever we might say, right? A lot of people, maybe even listening, you might want to who know this stuff better than me. The thing about too much work too soon is that for teams that are trying to become agile, too much work too soon will be happening. They will be doing it. So it is something you can see in your world, in your actual experience of the work that you're doing. It's there, and it points the direction to moving in a more agile, towards a more agile way of working, you know. And that's why I think it's important. It's not something that is just an abstract concept, like individuals and interactions over process and tools, a bit too abstract for people to act upon easily, right? But also it's not something we're trying to create in the future. Things that we're trying to create in the future are very important, but they're not here now. And that's a different thing, you know. Things that are here now, these big bits of work piling up, it's there and you can see it if you just start to pay attention to it, and it will point you in the right direction of becoming more agile, which means putting more smiles on users' faces, creating more value for your customers and more profit for shareholders, right? That's the outcome that we're after. So anyway, I've sort of repeated myself there, but there's the tip.
I really like that. I'm really glad that you shared this tip. So thank you very much.
Well,
Let's move to that next question about remote work. What have you learned about remote work? And maybe before we jump into that, ask, when did you start doing remote work? Because some people think everybody started just in COVID, but I've discovered that many people have done remote work even a lot earlier. So when was that for you when you started with remote work?
I can't. Oh, I know. I can remember a time when I was in the office 5 days a week. That I was going to say I couldn't, but I can. So then I can remember it being a battle at UBS. So it was before COVID. I would say there has always been an element of remote working for me. Being in the office 5 days a week, bar the early years of my career, 90s, mid 90s, has sort of been a thing. So spending a day or two a week in a what we would call now a hybrid way of working, was a thing. But when I started working at Adaptivist almost exactly 6 years ago, Adaptivist is a fully remote company. That was before COVID. And that was the first fully remote company that I'd worked in. So, of course, COVID landed, lots of people were struggling, and we were already rocking and rolling. It didn't bother us very much at all. So that was the first fully remote organization that I'd worked for. Yeah, even though when I was at IBM, we were actually working quite a lot. So there's always been a very large proportion of remotes working in my world, or almost always. And working for Adaptivist, it was totally remote. And what I've learned about it, I am just a bit of a contrarian, right? If there is a consensus moving in a particular direction, I'm going to try and figure out what it would look like from the other perspective. So, one of the things that we say about remote work is that that there are lots of things that don't happen in a remote working that do in a physical workplace. Right, the water cooler moments and the connection, the human connection is different, and so on. And of course, that's true. There are a lot of differences. But what I've learned is that if we pay more attention to human interactions, to human relationships, then many of the things that we can do online, remote working, we can do more effectively than we can in the office. And I'll give you this was the big surprise to me. So I'll give you an example, because that's not what I've said is a bit abstract and not very clear. One of the difficulties we face I face in the work I do with people is that we're trying to create a balance between sort of social cohesion. So we talk about, these are Michael Hammond's words, Lisa Atkins' words, building a social container that balances psychological support and psychological challenge. Okay, so we're building the social container. We're trying to strengthen the relationships so that when we bring the heat, that is, when we deliberately make things uncomfortable by challenging people's underlying assumptions, something, the social network doesn't break and move away. So we don't want people to feel completely comfortable and safe all the time, right? Because there's no development of the complexity of your meaning making if you're comfortable all the time. We've got to get outside of our comfort zone sometimes. We know this, right? But not for too long, and not in ways that break people, okay? Because that can happen. Now, one of the benefits of doing this online is that there's a little bit more distance between people. We're here together and we're present, but there's we can sort of dial up and dial down, or individuals can dial up and dial down the intensity of the interaction in a way you can't if you're physically in a room together, right?
Because then there is no way to dial it, because there is
There are ways to dial it, but they're different and they're harder. It's intense. Being with people, physically, when the situation is difficult, can be very intense. But if we're challenging some heartfelt underlying assumptions, people can turn their camera off, right? If they want to, we prefer it if they didn't, but they could. And that can just feel a little bit less intense for them. So it actually puts other people in control of their sense of safety in that context in a way that they wouldn't be face to face. So I think if you're intentional about the interactions, there are actually things that I thought couldn't be done online, like navigating that boundary between comfortable and uncomfortable. They can be done better online than they can face to face. So that's I think that's important. That feels important to me, you know.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And yeah, for me, one of the things I keep telling people is that this kind of conversation what we're having it remote. We've never met before, and still we can be very present. We can be very much connected. I feel at this point very much connected. We share very deep stories. So yeah, this is for me an example of what is possible remote, even with people who've never met each other.
Yes.
The big difference is we set aside some time to take that. I ask, yeah, these are good but deep questions that, and I take the time. The goal was never like, oh, I don't want to make videos of 10 minutes or 25. I know that will work much better on YouTube, but I don't care because I care about that connection and taking the time to do it in a good way. And somehow remote, people don't always take that time. And like you say, we do have that option, but we sometimes forget about these options, I would say.
I think that is a wonderful example. You've taken the time. Yes, you've taken the time. What's my experience of this interaction? Because I'm enjoying it very much, and I agree with you. I feel like it's amazing that this is the first time we've spoken, and it feels close and connected like this. And once upon a time, I think that we would have thought, not you and I necessarily, maybe us too, but the world in general, that a closeness and a connection could only happen face to face, and online was a poor substitute. And what we're saying here, it isn't. There is a connection, even though I'm only a face, a human to human connection, even though I'm just some pixels on your screen and vice versa. And why? Because we slowed down and we were intentional about paying attention to the quality of the interaction.
Right.
Now, face to face, you don't need that. The connection can emerge without you being as intentional about it. I think it just happens, you know.
Or
Here,
we we
learn how
we,
to do
we
it.
I'm not sure if I fully agree like that it just happens. I think we have learned the face-to-face interactions since childhood. We have had all these kind of interactions, and for most people, especially my and your age, we're not used to having the remote interactions. If I look at my 17-year-old daughter, the way she interacts remotely with people, that she has much more experience in this because most of her life she has some of that thing. So I think it's much more natural to her than it is to me, for example.
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps, yeah, might be to the sort of the generation younger than us, our kids. You're right, what you said to not agree with me. I think I didn't really agree with me, or I agreed with you. And you're right. It it doesn't just happen, but because we've spent so much time interacting face to face, and because we can see each other's body language and read mood and all sorts of other things easier face to face, we haven't had to pay as much attention to it. It happens more
Exactly.
naturally. We can do it without thinking, sort of second nature, right?
Mhm.
When we get online, it's different. I think we have to pause. We have to slow down. I think starting meetings online by taking a minute just to bring your attention to your breathing, which sounds a bit mad for a lot of people, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple of years that's very, very normalized in meetings. Just taking a moment to arrive, to connect, to remembering that we're human beings here together. You know, that's what we've done, and we've been intentional about it because it doesn't happen as easily online. Maybe it's for our generation, but I think for the kids too. right? Something else I want to add to that. Yes, to illustrate the point, I had a meeting earlier today, and it was shorter. So there was a thing, just half an hour, right? And I was very uncomfortable in it. And I told the other person I was uncomfortable. And it wasn't that they did anything wrong. They were wonderful, actually, but it was another person that I didn't know. But it was compressed into half an hour. As soon as we were both on the screen, it was just ping. We were right in, no time to connect. And then there were just questions fired at me that felt really, really transactional. So it was an uncomfortable experience for me, and we didn't really connect and that's not because it was half an hour. We could have done it half an hour. You and I took moments to do it, I think, but we did do it. And there's an example of what happens when we don't, so it can be done. Human to human connection can be done. Meaningful human to human connection over the internet can be done, but you've got to pay a bit more attention. Just take a moment to do it. That's what I've learned. There we go.
Yeah, and I think with your example of the half an hour conversation you had, if in that first 5 minutes people, both you and the other person, would have taken the time to connect, that probably that conversation would have been, well, I'm pretty sure that the conversation would have been different. And that's indeed the intentional. It's interesting that when we go to meetings physically, typically you're the first, and then there's another person coming in, and you have some kind of chit chat about whatever, doesn't matter, but you take the time to connect in that moment. Remotely, somehow it feels like, and I have to kind of force myself, but I'm trying, is that when I'm remotely, typically people keep working, doing email, whatever, until everybody's there. And I'm trying to change that and really trying to, okay, how is it? How are you? Whatever. It's harder. It's much more natural physically, but I think that's part of the key of having better remote meetings. Just
Think
using
about,
the time.
yeah, sorry to interrupt. But imagine if we'd done this face to face, some things would have just naturally been present for us. First of all, we'd have been able to see each other's eyes and read each other's expressions in a way. I would have, aware of it or not, I'd have been sensing something about your body posture and the way you held yourself, and you might. We probably would have shaken hands, so there would have been a physical skin to skin contact. All these things are important signals to both our own nervous systems and the other person's that this is a safe interaction, right? And that doesn't happen in the same way online. That's the bit that we need to become more intentional about. And it doesn't necessarily need to take a lot of time, but you're very present. That's what I feel in you, right? You're definitely here with me. I'm almost forgetting that we're being recording and there are other people watching. As Lisa said, it's like to you, it's like leaning on a bar at a conference, having a chat at the end of the day with a glass of wine or a beer or whatever, That's because we took the time to connect. Anyway, now I'm repeating myself, so I'll stop. But I think it's an important learning.
Yeah, I really like that. It's stressing out that part that is so part of your what you've learned about remote work. So thank you for taking that time. Let's move to that next question about a book. What's a book that you have read that you wanted to bring out?
So the one I mentioned to you, which is well worth mentioning, is called Evolve Agility.
And that's the one?
That's the one by that gentleman there, Michael Hammond. He wrote that in 2018. And I mean, I think it's brilliant. The subtitle is Growing a Leadership Culture from the Inside Out, right? And I think Michael he's built on a lot of other people's work, for sure, as we all do, right? I mean, he would say that he's not claiming to have invented it all himself, but he gives us something that gets us to the practices, the things that we can do in our interactions, in our way of working, that move beyond way beyond the theory, which there's some theory in there into the so that book I think is seminal, seminal importance to me when I read it in 2018. I think early 2019, just after it come out. And I was so intrigued by so many of the things in the book. Michael leans on the work of Robert Keegan and adult developmental psychology, or constructivism, sometimes it's called. And I became so fascinated by this that I sort of went off and I read Keegan's work and I watched his interviews, and I'd learned, it spent about 5 years learning about the things that Michael had pointed me to in his wonderful book, right? And then in 2023, got to meet him. Long story, won't go into it. And then worked with him and spoke with him a lot and joined him on a training program that he was doing. And so much of his work just dropped into place for me. And suddenly the world made sense for me in a way it hadn't done before. And it felt like I read the book in 2019. I went on this 5-year journey to understand understand more deeply the things that he talked about. And then I arrived back with Michael Hammond and Evolve Agility. And it was profound experience for me, really was. So that's a
wonderful advertisement for the book. I think that I have the book somewhere there, but I've never finished it completely. I've only started or did the beginning, and then got distracted by this podcast and a couple of other things.
Yeah, I understand.
So I never finished reading it. But it's not the first time I heard people being very positive about Michael's books.
Good. Good. I think his work is so good and so unique in a way in the agile space and our space. It deserves more recognition. And I say deserves not because it's so good, but because what he's advocating really works. Michael also believes that the workplace can be a catalyst for social good, right? Like many of us, he's passionate about that and has been for much longer than I have, right? And the approach he advocates and the practices that he teaches work. That's the thing. That's the thing for me, the practical side of it. So yeah, wonderful book, wonderful man. Great teacher, visionary, great communicator. I'm gushing a little bit. I was very starstruck. I hope he doesn't watch.
Well, that's the other part that we do when you talk about people that they might learn about it. But on the other hand, I think we don't tell enough the people that brought us to where we are. I think it's really. I think it's an important part of making sure, because we all got, maybe it's a teacher when we're younger, or maybe it's a coach or someone else who inspired us. And I do hope that we can do that in our world as well. This is one of the reasons.
Yeah, not just to say thank you, but to give them the feedback about what worked. Because Michael's doing the work he does, not because he wants to be praised or lauded, but because he wants to make a difference. Well, I don't know that he would say that, but he does want to. I think that's okay for me to say. So knowing how he made a difference for me, not just that he did, to know his impact on my work and my life, I think that's useful feedback for him. When I get it from other people about my work, I no longer sort of shy away and go, oh no, really, and that's just what you think, I'm not that great, or whatever, whatever it is. I listen to what they say, because I might not agree with the point of view about the value of the work that I've done for them. That's not the point. If they tell me that the 8 hours of coaching that we've done together has been transformative on the way they work, it's not appropriate if I go, oh no, I didn't, I was nothing. No. Whether it's true or not is by the by. It is their view. So I have told Michael what the difference his work has made for me, and it is my view. And when I was at Adaptivist, we had a book club. We all 6 of us Actually, some external clients read his book together in a book club. And Michael was going to join us. Unfortunately, it didn't happen for various reasons. Because he wanted to know what people were taking away from the book. Because, of course, as the writer of the book, you don't really know that, do you? And you don't often get the chance to learn. So, yes, I think it's an important part of our development and our growth, not just to flatter the other person, but so we can all move forward together.
I think that's indeed the how would I say it, when I ask feedback for people and the feedback is, oh, it's perfect and there is nothing to improve, then I get disappointed in a way.
Yeah.
Because like, oh, come on, tell me some more. Like okay, what's there to learn? What because there is always something that can be improved, and maybe it's small, maybe it's big, but it's really good that that we can learn and that
we've got to be able to hear it though, haven't we? So now, like you, I imagine, I love it when I get just praise. It's not great, thank you, but it doesn't really help me learn so much, right, about the work. I want some critical thinking applied to it and find out where its weaknesses were. So when I do get that, which is rare, I don't think people want to be critical of somebody else's work, really. They find it difficult. When I do get it, I really welcome it. But in welcoming it, what I have to notice is that sometimes it is a little bit hard to hear. And certainly earlier in my career, if somebody was critical of my work, I took it very personally. And then I couldn't hear the critique, and that slowed down my learning. So again, it's incumbent upon us to show up and listen differently, to bring a high quality of listening before other people will speak, And of course, the critical thinking that people apply to our work is where we learn most, isn't it? And that's gold.
Exactly. Really wonderful ways of, again, the publicity, but also the little tips that are attached to it. I love it. Thank you very much. I want to move to that next question, and for me, this is the one that I typically look forward to most. Again, especially after in conversations like this one, what's a question that I didn't ask and that you think I should also ask you, and then what's the answer?
Oh, this is one I should have prepared for, isn't it? Which I didn't. Okay. There was a moment where what you could have said was, so there was a moment when I mentioned, I think, our nervous systems. Maybe I've said that a couple of times, and how they communicate with each other. And I think there was a moment where I said that's co-regulation, right? And the question you might have asked is, what's co-regulation, John? And the answer would have been, well, our nervous systems, our autonomic nervous systems actually, are constantly scanning the environment outside of our conscious awareness. They're constantly scanning the environment for two things: cues of safety and cues of threat. And I say two things. Stephen Porges, who came up with polyvagal theory, says it's two things and differentiates between two, because safety is not merely the absence of threat, right? So when we meet, when we shake hands, when we smile, when we make eye contact, what I'm doing is communicating to you that my nervous system is in a safe, grounded place that can socially engage. And that communication is co-regulation. And that has an impact on your nervous system. Our nervous systems then negotiate their way to the same place. Okay, either highly agitated, ready to start a fight or run away, or maybe they shut down, or maybe they go safe, right? But you know what it's like when you're sitting in a meeting and somebody walks in and you can sense that they're already angry. You don't even need them to get through the door before you've sensed the uh-oh that comes with you, right? And of course, your nervous system responds to that, goes, oh, I better get ready to defend myself here because that looks quite threatening. Okay, so co-regulation is this silent communication between our nervous systems. saying whether the environment is safe or not, and this negotiation of getting our nervous systems to the same place. And a lot of that is done through body language, micro signals that we don't notice. But what also seems to be implicated are mirror neurons, neurons that move in my brain merely, it would seem, to reflect what neurons are doing in your brain. Mirror neurons seems to be some sort of quantum entanglement between our neurons, right? We are connected through co-regulation. Our nervous systems are connected at the deepest level. And through co-regulation, we're communicating with each other. That's why if I'm very calm and grounded and measured, particularly if I'm in a situation where something's going wrong, people will gravitate towards me, towards the calmness, and they'll calm as well, right? So you could have asked about, I mean, you couldn't actually, but anyway, that's a question, to answer your question, that's a question you could have asked, what's co-regulation? And that's a sort of a little bit of a clunky answer. It's our nervous systems communicating directly with each other.
I love that detailed answer, and I'm already happy I didn't ask the question because now I get this for free on top of it. So really wonderful, thank you. And indeed, like with every interaction, there are questions I sometimes ask to go deeper, and sometimes I think, oh, okay, I'm not going to ask for multiple kind of reasons, and now I still got the answer, so that's even better. Let's move to that already last question. Who's the person I should ask next?
Well, I would suggest Michael Hammond.
And I think this is Michael, although
that's him. Yeah, that's Michael.
And you already talked about his book. You already talked a little bit about some of the things you learned. Next to that, why would he be a good person to have here on?
Well, his thing is agile. Okay, so a lot of the people whose work I really value, like Michael's, like Jan Windhall, who I've mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. Jan knows nothing about software development agile. She's a therapist. She's helping therapists get better at helping their clients, right? Michael was a software developer and works in this agile space and knows it. So he's sort of, his work is very relevant to what we're doing here. That's an important overlap. Mm-hmm. However, he also brings something very different. He brings something unique that I don't know that of anybody else that brings what he brings. So he both fits enough to be familiar and is different enough to be interesting and challenging and informative and so on. You know, that's why I would say why.
That's a wonderful description of a person. Like, okay, because in a way we're all different, but yeah, I see many people indeed that think, okay, there should be some kind of connection with agile. The lady you mentioned is probably also in mindset very similar, but she might not understand then indeed some of the of the work that we're doing. But there might still be some kind of connection. But with Michael, that's very clear, of course. Mm. That's indeed why he's. I'm really looking forward. He was on my list already for a long time. Yeah, that's the problem with right now. I have what was it this morning? I looked. I think 752 or something like that people on the list. So that's a very long list. I already know, I keep mentioning it every time, I know I won't talk to everybody before I stop, because that's just way too many years. I'm already doing this for 3 years. I still want to do it till the end of the year. Mm-hmm. I don't know, every year in December I decide, will I go back for another year? I don't know. But he was on that list in a way waiting for someone to be invited. Because that's a little bit how it goes. From time to time, I do invite other people myself, but most people are invited by other people. That's again brings some other kind of diversity, another kind of way and connections and things.
Yeah. I think it's a clever thing to do. Diversity, connections. Allows it to have a little bit of a life of its own, doesn't it? To
Exactly.
develop itself. Yeah.
So that's a little bit the idea. Anyway, John, it's been a wonderful time
I've
to
loved it.
spend
Thank
with
you very much.
You said earlier on that you might fall asleep, but I think you have still
I'm
lots
still
of
here.
energy.
Yep.
So do
Plenty of
I.
energy.
I get lots of energy about these conversations. John, for the people that want to connect and learn more with, what's a good way for them to connect with you?
LinkedIn's good. It's all on there. My email address is on there.
That
That's
should
me.
be your LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Everything else
I'd
is
love to hear from people. I'd love to connect. Yeah,
so
it'd be
that's
wonderful.
a wonderful way if people want to connect with you. It's been, like I said, it's been a wonderful time. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Eve. I've loved it. It's a real pleasure. Great work. Great job.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you
Adios.
for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.